Hello friends, my name is Callie. I wanted to do a little more informal of a video for you today and talk about virtue cultivation for a couple of reasons. One, because our deck is now available for purchase online. You can get it in our Etsy store. This is the Gift of Virtue Clarity deck. So I wanted to go over a little bit of what a clarity deck is, how you use it, what it's for. And I also wanted to go and touch base on some of the older concepts of the metaphysics behind how this came about, which you can see in an older video series about the language of astrology. That's more of a, kind of stuffy, formal, technical lecture, but you're welcome to go back if you want to just be bombarded with dense information. I wanted to do something a lot more, practical, casual, everyday, what those terms actually mean and how they might be applicable to the way your life is actually going. So I wanted to demonstrate how the clarification can work with integrated with regular tarot practice and go over some of that. So without further ado, let's get started. So firstly, just to go over what you get with this deck, we have this handy dandy QR code which you can scan on the side of the box. That's going to take you directly to our website page where we have all of the cards displayed in their main 12 categories, and so you can view them in detail there. And in addition to the 144 virtue cards, we have 4 elemental virtue cards which were added after, and I'm really glad that we did. They're kind of distinctive looking from the rest of the cards. They've got more darkness and contrast, and I had been kind of playing with that concept of an core elemental virtue for a while, but I find that even though you might not shuffle these in with the rest of the cards, these might be kind of a side concept. I really loved having separate cards of them. I don't know, they're very visually striking, but also the decisiveness and the gravitas, I guess, of what the 4 elemental virtues are has just really stuck with me. I've used it in a couple of other things. You might want to go back and watch the video about the elemental modes in their role from some very classic myths, right? We talk about Prometheus and Sisyphus and this concept of punishment and elementally what that might mean, why we have these myths, what they represent for us, the lessons that they're trying to teach in the form of a fable. So there's a really great video about that I'll link to below as well. But the concepts that come out of those myths and the negativity of the punishment or the feeling of lack is the transcendent quality of the virtue, right? The growth through that adversity, and what the elemental continuity might be of that. So for fire, we have valor. Earth is patience. Air is alacrity, which kind of means like swiftness, Godspeed, things like that. And then for water, it's control. And by control, I don't mean domination or control of others, it's self-control, right? It's personal regulation. So those are, potentially something that you're not going to shuffle in with the other 144, but I wanted to include them in the deck. So to explain a little bit about the main cards, this is a pretty big, honky-chonky deck. That is one thing, we've heard feedback about, like, wow, this is so many cards. It might feel like a lot or a little bit cumbersome. And I understand, people must be asking, how are you supposed to shuffle such a thing? The reason that it's 144 is because it's the 12 signs exchanging with the other 12, so it's multiplied, and there wasn't really a way to, and you wouldn't want to simplify that or lose the detail or the nuance of coming up with this sort of definitive, complete, holistic set. So as far as concerns about shuffling, the easy answer is that you're going to just split it. You just split it, do your initial shuffle, shuffle these as regular, recombine, and then the way that I was taught to shuffle tarot cards includes splitting it into 3 sections anyway. So what you may want to do is, in your personal practice, shuffle, as I described, 2 separate, just to get it completely mixed in. There's no reversal, so you don't have to worry about anything like that. They just are the card that they are. So once you get the randomization, then you get the additional intuitive guidance from sensing out the 3 piles. I usually do 3 because 3 is, the number of motion and has significance to me, but you are more than welcome to split it in a number that's significant to you. But then you feel out, which is the pile that you're going to go forward with, and then you may subject that pile to additional shuffles. You may take it at the level that it's at. But the overall quantity, you're not necessarily going to be shuffling all of them in every draw, if that makes sense. And that's worked out really well for me. But as I said, I originally learned to do the shuffling that way. I know a lot of people, especially YouTubers that I watch, they do the, I can't really emulate this way, rather than poker shuffling. I've never done it that way. I don't even really know how they do it. They do it so fast. I'm just not that dexterous, I guess. But yeah, that would be you would want to narrow it down before you go forward with that style of shuffling, if that's what you prefer. I'm used to just the poker style, so I just do it that way. But each of these cards is part of a pair, right? So there's an exchange. And to explain, let me get one that's got 2 different elements. Right off we have ambition, which is the gift that Aries is giving to Taurus. So in the mandala design, we have the elemental mandala of fire and of earth. So it's showing you the elemental shift of mode, or shift of state. And then you have this symbol in the corner, which tells you the giver and the receiver as well in the zodiacal glyph. So it's nice and clear about that. And there is in this deck the opposite. There's going to be what Taurus gives to Aries. And so if you're doing a reading perhaps about a specific relationship or something that's happening, it may be helpful to get out both of those cards and look at the exchange that may be happening. What the exchange basically means is to take a step back and look at the difference in priority. All of these things, all of these virtues are adaptive, right? All of them are trying to give us more of what we want and solve a particular problem. And given that the world is as complex as it is, every single adversity or barrier is going to have multiple solutions, multiple ways to go about solving that problem. And as a being, you are going to have access to multiple avenues of conflict resolution, right? Problem solving. The thing that is your comfort zone, the thing that is your natural reaction to every situation, is not going to be appropriate to every situation, even if you specify, your abilities in that area for your whole life and you train at it and you're the very best at powering through problems, or you're the very best diplomat, you're the best at talking around problems. There is always going to be a situation that comes up in your life where elementally or based on the other energies that are present in the situation, that is just not going to be the appropriate response, and any amount of oomph that you put behind it is not going to be sufficient for solving that problem. You need to be able to shift modes. And so if you really want a good, well-rounded understanding of the world, learning what the different elemental modes, how to observe them in yourself, how to recognize them in other people and things that are happening, helps you to understand the energy that you're being met with. And this is a concept that's being accepted more in things like business management. I saw a thing, they have this color system that's the 4 color system, red, green, yellow, blue, which very obviously does correlate to the elemental association and the temperaments and sort of the personality typing that they try to do with the system. It's pretty obvious that this is what it's actually talking about. So there's, more research being done into it if you're concerned about that sort of thing. But basically what it means is, be open to the situation and take it and accept it as it is. Don't just try to impose your own way, preferred way of dealing with things on every single situation. So using this just as a study tool or a training tool to observe those different things can be really helpful if you're not even, if you're just keeping it in order and you're not shuffling it, you're not using it with a tarot reading. It can be a great reference just to go and pick through the deck and pick out the cards and be like, okay, what is this person saying? Say you have a conflict at work. Right? There's a conflict of interest. The company has a vested interest in being successful and serving, quality service to its clients, right? But when internally there is a problem between the employees or the management or whatever, sometimes the egos get in the way, and so we need ways to conflict manage. So maybe if you're having that situation, something that could be helpful is try to, after the argument or the transgression or whatever happened, take a look at what the emphasis was of what each party was saying. What was the priority that they were placing? What was the virtue that they were trying to put forth about themselves, that they thought they were handling the situation better? How could you maybe find a word that goes with that? And if you look through the deck, of course it's helpful if you actually know their elemental mode, or their sign, and you can just kind of make that kind of association automatically. But just from feeling and looking at the cards, you can also kind of tell, like, this person was coming at it from a very diligence perspective. They thought that they were showing due diligence and that they were being very thorough. And their criticism of me was that I wasn't doing that enough. I wasn't being conscientious. I was rushing my work, and thus I was to blame for failure to serve the customer well. And if you try to, even if they're being really disagreeable, maybe they're being really passive aggressive, maybe they did this in the form of like a write-up, or trying to, snitch on you, or not even confront you directly. There's all kinds of unpleasant ways that maybe this could go down. But if you take a step back and at least kind of narrow down, okay, this person values diligence. This is the adaptation that they think is the most applicable to the situation. Whereas I felt, maybe it's something more to do with expedience. Maybe it's something more in, that was in earth mode. So maybe something more in an air mode was what, and those are often kind of opposed because they're very opposite states of energy, right? You have the gas versus solid can often come into conflict in approach. So just as, water and fire, hot versus cold, very different approach. So in particular, you might see conflict when the state of being is very vastly different. So, here's a good one. So maybe they were really emphasizing diligence and you were emphasizing curiosity. You were trying to find the parts that felt good about the exchange, the things that personally interested you, and follow through with those and kind of leave the rest of the grindy paperwork stuff at the door because it was detracting from your personal investment in the client and your ability to connect with them and your ability to question them and get really authentically interested in what it was that they were trying to get out of your company. So if you can identify both of those things and kind of put them together in a conversation, let's say this is a fairly simple disagreement between just two people, not an entire department or something like that. So let's say you go back to have a conversation with diligence person. A really good way to, if it's someone that you want to continue to have dealings with, if it's someone that you plan to keep this job, you don't want to just quit and give up, and you do want to cultivate a good working relationship, then the first thing you do in that conversation is state your intention. Be like, look, for the sake of our work, for the sake of our sanity, I would like to learn to work with you better. Let me see if I have this right. You seem to value diligence, and you're concerned that maybe I'm not cultivating that virtue enough. Is that right? First of all, you want to try to clear it up, actually get approval and consent from them that you're representing them fairly in your own mind, or give them the opportunity to correct you. And then getting them on board by taking the initiative to try to show, like, I value the virtue that you're trying to give to the table. I understand that you think this is adaptive. Then you can get them back on your side. You can say, we have the same goal. We're on the same team. I also want that. Here is what I have found to be adaptive. And, maybe the way that you go about that is anecdotal. Maybe you can communicate best with examples, or maybe you don't like that. Maybe you want to keep it more technical, and just show, this is helpful, this is helpful. Here's evidence for that in a different situation. It's not anecdotal. Maybe it's just looking at a case study, if you like that sort of thing. So that's a way that you might use the exchange function of this deck, by just looking at comparison of a couple cards. That's particularly helpful in a clarity deck versus an oracle or a tarot deck, because oracle decks don't tend to have those type of pairings or dualities. It's not like you can draw equivalents between two cards, right? You can show lots of cool different things, like it's both adaptive to be a camel and an elephant, but those are very, kind of abstract. If you're really connected with that deck and, that's what's really resonating for you, maybe it's easy to navigate that, and oracle cards are actually really helpful clarifiers for you. I wanted to develop a deck that was very cut and dry. All of the detail of the symbolism is unpacked into the vocabulary itself, so the high quantity of cards helps to distribute what is kind of concentrated in a tarot deck. Right? Any tarot card that you pull is going to be really thick and rich with symbolism, and you're going to have to read all these different parts of the card that may be coming into play in the situation. Here I have the crystal tarot I'm going to use for my example. Very pretty deck. But for example, here we have the card Temperance, and there are so many things to unpack about the Temperance tarot card versus Temperance clarity card. So that might be a particularly good one, because that's one of the cardinal. That one's not an exchange. That one is the sign cardinal of Libra. Brain fart there, sorry. And we can find that card. I'm leaving these in order just for my own ease of use. Okay, so we have Temperance and Temperance. And I'll read you what's written on the card in order to facilitate memorization and, as a mnemonic device. Wow. All of the cards have these axioms or phrases, which I like to think of them as things that Grandpa would say. They're not quite dad-isms, right? They're kind of a level up from that. And even though sometimes when you're kind of applying them coldly to a situation, it comes off as a little like know-it-all or flippant, or, because of how condensed and simple and how many times this has been said over and over through the generations, they tend to be kind of helpful, even if they aren't the most warm fuzzy. So for Temperance, it's sober as a judge. And the definition, all the cards also have a concise definition of the word if you're not familiar. Some of the words that I use are kind of like old-timey, I guess maybe you'd say, or they're, Latin derivative, which I'm really comfortable with, but I understand that's not really the standard jargon. So voluntary moderation of passions or appetites, abstinence from intoxication. And so that's of course meant not just in the literal drinking alcohol sense, but also overindulgence in things like media, right? Over doom scrolling, imbibing, hyperstimulating yourself. When you're observing temperance, you are refraining from things which impair your judgment. And so that might be really emotionally heated content, that you're consuming, or people that you are subjecting yourself to, or energies that you are immersed in. So temperance can also be just regulation of environment and knowing your limits, to go with that analogy a little more, knowing how much you can expose yourself to before you will start to lose yourself and your boundaries will erode. So temperance has to do with that. And it's very clear cut when you're just reading the verbiage, if you have to unpack it as the tarot card. Usually there's a lot to do with like pouring of water. Usually it's an angelic kind of figure, or a woman who is regulating pouring water between two jars. Maybe I should have gone with the classic version. This version is depicted as her kind of just standing in a field. Sometimes it has to do with irrigation. I know in my other Atlantis tarot deck, Temperance is the crop fields, and you know, the moderation that comes from agriculture and irrigating, you know, not too much, getting the right amount of water. So there's all that kind of imagery that you have to unpack on the tarot card. So having a clarity card that is not also a tarot card or also imagery, I thought would be really helpful. You know, I explored the market for all kinds of different offerings and how other people were doing it. And there's these sort of cute little inspiration decks that are pretty much oracle cards. They seem to function much the same way, but they're much smaller. And those are cool. I might be doing a set like that in the future with different content that could be compatible with this or used in addition to this. But I really love having just a core set that is just, you know, this is how it is. This is what these things are. Here's your definition. Here's a handy phrase to memorize. So let's say we're going to actually do a clarification that isn't the sort of word playfulness I tried to do there by picking one that was also a virtue. In one, probably, maybe for this, I don't know. It seems to be a little bit uncommon. Sorry, my box is real beat up because this gets a lot of use. But this is the Montaigne Tarot, which is a Renaissance-inspired set, and it has the virtues actually as an entire section. I think it's, I'm going to get this all wrong, please don't quote me, but I think it's like 5 or 6 different letter suits, and I think there's 10 cards per suit. There's like the planets, there are these archetypes here. The Emperor is an archetype. It has the Muses, Talia the Muse. The Celestial Spheres, so it's got planets, and this one is just called Upper Heavens. These are really shiny, sorry if it's bugging out the camera. Where is just the Virtue one? Here's the card I want. Oh, here we go. Light blue background. So here's Prudence, which is, you know, one of the cardinal from the Renaissance. So some types of decks are actually already kind of arranged that way. The Classic Tarot has kind of some selectively. So you're going to see some continuity between some of those decks, you know, where they're actually using the same verbiage, such as Temperance. I love the style of this one, but it is a bit hard to read, so. Go ahead and pick one. Interesting. How about here? Perfect. So we got the Hanged Man. So let's say you pull the Hanged Man in a reading. And you're looking for clarification. And you get this one, Solidity. If you build it, they will come. Fortitude or strength, reliable structure, substance, and character. We're not going to read reversal, I'm just going to do the upright. So let's say you're looking for clarity, you're looking for an explanation when you have in your spread the Hanged Man. So in this deck, as in others, the Hanged Man actually has its own different name. It's still written as that name on the card, but if you actually look up the meaning in this tarot deck, it has its own definition. So let's go ahead and read that first. The Hanged Man is also called the Sacrifice in this Crystal Tarot deck. He is the suffering which we must accept in order to reach understanding. Enlightenment is achieved through ordeal. So the need to endure an ideal to reach enlightenment. This symbol is often associated with the deity Odin, and the need to sort of pull back and introspect and take time to achieve sagely wisdom through some sort of tribulation or trial. And the symbolism of being stationary, being stuck hanging from a tree, experiencing this rush of blood that, among other things, experiencing this perhaps externally imposed timeout or hiatus where we are forced to then look within. If the clarifier for, what is the need for that, what is the wisdom that needs to be gained, you pull the card Solidity, then my interpretation would be perhaps you aren't putting in the due diligence within yourself. You have this dream, you have this aspiration or this thing that you're asking for, trying to manifest, and you're experiencing frustration that it is not coming to be. Pulling Solidity tells me maybe there's a need to cultivate the space for that to be in your own life. Say, your goal is friendship. You're lonely, you don't have the connections you used to, you're looking to have friends. So what do? Right? You go out and party, or you go out and explore all of these things, you go to festivals, you go to events, right? You go to try to network. But you find that despite all of the different things that you're trying to do, the outreach and trying to meet new people, none of them are staying. It's a very surface level connection. They're all acquaintances, or they're only interested in the thing that you found a common interest together in, whatever that event was. They're not necessarily personally interested in you. You haven't really cultivated that, fulfilling mutual relationship. Kitty break. Will you say hi, please? Meow. What are you doing? So Solidity as a clarifier might be an indication that in searching for this wish, maybe the wrong approach was taken and the need arose to take a step back and experience a period of isolation, as we all had, and kind of reevaluate the foundation that wish was supposed to be laid upon. Because if you are expecting something solid, something with this substantive, hefty gravitas to it, that's something like a deep relationship that you're going to carry on with you for years and years, you have to look at the foundation. Did you build it on sand? Maybe very literally, did you just go off and hope to meet people on vacation or while out traveling, knowing that they probably wouldn't be able to come to see you in person, or, that you'd kind of flung your energy far out there instead of like building the home base that would facilitate the kind of continued cultivated connection that you're looking for. So maybe it represents a need to maybe take a look at your home base if you don't have a home situation that's conducive to having company. Maybe that was part of your original inspiration for going out to other events or in other spaces, because either you're having to share a home, or it presents too much of a logistical issue, or you don't want to let people in. There's all kinds of reasons why that may be the case. But then either you have to take a look at that and whether that's something you want to change, whether that's something that's within your power to do something about, or whether you need to maybe just make a compromise, find maybe something closer to home that you can start to use as that common ground. And maybe that includes doing an activity more like volunteering, or something that's going to be more regular and less, maybe less fun. It might not be as exciting as going around to concerts or something like that, but the regularity is going to provide the solidity that you're looking for. Six of Wands. Now, one criticism I do have of this deck is it doesn't do a whole illustration on the minor arcana, which I don't particularly dig, so I don't use this one very much, but it is pretty. The Six of Wands represents opposition or obstacles, things that need to be overcome and a need to introduce more energy into the system. So to get a clarifier, sensitivity, very interesting. So the clarity deck introduces, of course, a plethora of more nuance than simply doing something like reading reversals. Of course, you also have to keep in mind the context of the surrounding cards and what the whole situation is shaping up like. But this is kind of seemingly contradictory. You know, usually Six of Wands would be indicating something like, oh, there's a standoff, you know, there's a need to power through the situation. But coming in with the clarity of sensitivity is saying, oh no, this is not actually a situation to simply puff up your chest and force your way through. In fact, soft words can win hard hearts. Awareness of others' emotional or mental state, a gentle stance of kindness. So this is really asking you to check yourself when you're looking at the nature of this obstacle. Is this a person? Is this somebody that you're painting as, you know, being your enemy and being very confrontational to you and being, you know, a problem for your hopes and dreams? Have you actually taken the time to humanize with them? You know, have you tried to soften yourself and not just get defensive in response to a perceived opposition? You know, this, I think drawing sensitivity is not necessarily saying rethink your perspective at all or like your goals. It's not saying that you shouldn't want the things that you do or that this isn't perhaps an impasse that needs to be overcome, but it's saying the way in which you need to modulate in order to address the impasse is through gentleness, is through showing consideration instead of doubling down on your own self-interest. So those are some examples of how these cards can be used as clarifiers and also how you can use them in their own right. So now I want to kind of touch base about the metaphysical concepts that these are deriving from and what kind of things you can do in your own life to actually cultivate virtue. How do you grow these things once you identify that they are things that you need to be mindful of or turn your attention to or potentially work on? I don't want this to come off as some super heavy-handed self-help stuff. I think just by the nature of the topic, maybe it may appear that way. But I'd like to keep it in the more practical, technical, here's just some things space. So in the videos where I go over virtue as a survival mechanism, I propose this concept that I have throughout all of my work of the 3 primary motivations. And so you've probably stumbled upon them in astrology through the concept of the cardinal, mutable, and fixed. And if you were anything like me, when I first started learning about these things, I completely disregarded it, found it to be completely useless and vague and just not applying to anything. So I find those words to be really unhelpful. But at some point I took some time to dive into that. That's where my intuition was kind of leading, and I was like, oh, maybe there's actually something here, but I don't think it's what it's been kind of touted as. So in exploring these concepts, I found that these signs actually did have this thing in common, which was this concept of their primary motivation. So first off, I'll just list them. First, you have cardinal signs, which are the primary motivation of power. And those are Aries, Capricorn, Libra, and Cancer. And then you have the fixed signs, which have a primary motivation of love. And those are Leo, Aquarius, Scorpio, and Taurus. And finally, you have the mutable signs, which I think is the worst word out of them, but you have the primary motivation of wisdom. And for those, you have Gemini, Virgo, Pisces, and Sagittarius. And so what these primary motivations tell us, I give the fun little exercise in that video of imagining yourself waking up in the wilderness, waking up in a barren field, totally alone, and having to take care of your own survival, and pursue the main needs that you have in the wilderness, which are water, food, and shelter. And so I do this fun little psychological exercise where I ask you to imagine which of those you are prioritizing in your search as you explore this unknown place. So that one's kind of fun. You can go check that out for more detail. But since we are not in the wild, we're not in a wilderness, we are in society, we're in our built world, interacting with other human beings and other things. We use these primary motivations as what our priority is when we're confronting, our everyday situations. So when you are of a power mindset, the thing that you are seeking to do from your interactions is to preserve as much of your personal vitality as possible, and it has kind of a solidifying effect. For whatever reason, that's become associated with fixed signs, but it explains something a little bit different in their case, and I'll go over that in just a second. But the solidity that I am talking about has to do with finalization. Each of these primary motivations also has the preferred stage in an action, right? You have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And cardinals are most concerned with finishing things, and potentially, some of them, destroying and making room for something new. But that final stage of concluding something is both what they kind of derive the most personal satisfaction from and have the most emphasis on. So primary motivation of love isn't necessarily meant to be exclusively romantic love. It has to do with an emphasis on the social sphere and on maintenance. This is the maintenance phase of action. So taking care of things, caring for things. And the primary motivation of wisdom is most concerned with the beginning, with getting things started, with the idea space and the conceptualization. And so the cultivation of wisdom and information and research is most engaged and most enthused, at the beginning of the process. And in particular, the ones on the ends, beginning and the end, are kind of divergent from each other in that same difference of state kind of way, right? You have kind of this gaseous state, this liquid state, and then a solid state. And the perspective and the emphasis on both of these things can seem sometimes to be a little bit at odds. But we always have to keep in mind that these cycles are ever recurring. It's more of a circle than a spectrum. It's always looping back to itself. So you cannot have a new beginning without an end, just like the whole purpose of an end is to give rise to a new beginning. So, keeping in mind that all of these things are part of the process, they're all necessary, they're all important. It's not like any one is better than any of the others. And understanding as fully as possible within ourselves, what the role of all of these things are and how they contribute to our life journey can help us to empathize with others and learn to navigate situations together. So, if you're anything like me, I'm sure you've sat through all of this and been like, this is all very nice and conceptual, but what do we actually do? What activity can you actually do to cultivate these things? What is the manifestation? So this is a concept I'm not exactly sure what form it's going to take. I've been messing with it for a while. Part of this is recapping some of the other stuff covered in the Language of Astrology series, which has to do with the correlation between the zodiac signs and the phases of life. which is derived much more from the I Ching practice. And I wanted to really come up with a list of archetypal activities that are the ways that we can go into the energy of and get to know these different phases of life, because theoretically a fully rounded, full, healthy individual should be able to go into any of these activities openly, receptively, not totally hate them. They should be options, because they are all very important to the human experience, right? So, based on the I Ching stuff, each of these zodiac signs has a gender association. This is just the energy, role, and influence. It's not meant to be taken strictly and literally. This is just to demonstrate the balance within the whole of the system and the way that it kind of follows us through our life journey. So this is not meant to be some sort of dominating prescriptive thing. These are just observations that I have had, and there are a couple of them, of course, that don't even match the traditional associations. And if you go and check out my graphic about the spiraling nature of this formation, you'll see why. So, that's not meant to be inflammatory. Disregard it if you find it off-putting. So for Aries, the activity is going hunting with the mature male. If you want to come to understand the priorities in the psyche of that archetype and that role and that phase of life and that, archetypical gender activity, then that's a way that you could go into that energy. And if you're finding yourself having disagreement or misunderstanding or conflict in particular with a person, either literally in that life role or in that energy, then these are potentially activities that you can volunteer to go and do. And, for some of them, especially if you're in a vastly different place in life than the one that I'm describing, might be kind of come off as a bit of a shock, depending on the extent of your disagreement. But you offering to do something, and then they might say, you never want to do that, you hate that I do that, it can trigger a lot of defensiveness, but I think by willingly going into that place is very disarming. It puts both people, these are all kind of flow activities. They're things that are putting us in a state of receptivity. A lot of them are requiring some sort of like Zen flow, zone out sort of like, repetition potentially. So all of these activities are, as part of our human experience, very primordially things that we could kind of lose our ego and lose our focused attention into the activity itself, and potentially be brought to a state of vulnerability and expression and honesty, and just let our guard down basically. And it's in some of these activities that I think you find the greatest ability to connect authentically with that person where they are at, and the container itself of the activity kind of provides that sense of security with you. If it's somebody that had been having trouble opening up to you, they're in their zone, they're in their mode, so their willingness to kind of come forward with other things that might be very difficult in a targeted conversation, right? If you've ever gotten the "we need to talk" text, like if you've ever been, sat down and kind of corralled into a conversation, like, I want to understand you better, how can we be, that's all very forced. It's very, people don't tend to respond very well to that, but if you kind of do the diversion thing, you're like, we don't have to talk about anything, let's just go hunting and see what happens. Sometimes things happen that are actually very magical and have nothing to do, and I understand, with that activity in particular, there may be some moral aversions of a vegan nature or something like that. It could be foraging then, if you prefer, if the animal aspect is problematic. It's the out of the home, mature male acquisition of food orientation. Fill in the blank with what you feel comfortable with. So, moving on, here's a big one. For Taurus, it's helping mom in the kitchen. It's a big one. If you've ever, been the type to kind of avoid, or she'll be maybe it's a holiday or something, and she'll be in there doing all of the things, and everybody else just sitting around, and she's becoming kind of frustrated and resentful because nobody's helping, but also she kind of doesn't want to let anyone help. It's probably a small kitchen, and she'd just be tripping over them, so it's just very tense and resentful. But I think like the willful choice to approach that, maybe not as something as tense as a holiday situation or high stakes or whatever, but voluntarily going into her energy. A lot of people kind of struggle with their relationship with their mom. That's a place that you can catch her, and showing a receptivity to that activity, and like that's a place that she might be comfortable opening up about things. And I've certainly had definitely some of the best conversations about the history of my family, or things that would be difficult to get to otherwise. The smells and the sounds are very evocative of memory, so it can be a really quick shortcut to get down deep without a whole lot of breaking ice, and scratching around. For Gemini, it is going on an adventure with a little boy. A lot of times this is kind of a stand by me, running up the railroad tracks or whatever, or going and building forts in the woods. It has kind of a Lost Boy flavor to it. Also, to note, it was pretty clear on the other two, but the age brackets that we're dealing with, we have kind of the infant stage, which is like 1 to, or 0 to 3 or 4 or so is kind of like the infant. It's not the cleanest split. It's supposed to kind of be, every 7 years, but for our purposes, something like that. And then the little boy, right, the kid stage is somewhere up to, from that 4 to like 7-ish, something like that, 8. And then we have the adolescent, which goes up to 14, and then the mature, which is more like towards 20, and on from there. So we're looking at the archetypal phases of life. I understand for what I'm describing in children, that might be a little bit vague, and it's for parents, I'm sure they're more aware of what those benchmarks are. I'm not super familiar with the total shift that happens at some of these ages. I know it from a research standpoint only. But for when I say little boy, it means somebody that's like 7 or 8. So for Cancer, we have volunteering or acts of service with the teen girl. This is, around the time in life you become kind of more community aware, kind of more socially conscious, and trying to figure out how that fits in with you and your identity. So, honoring that and taking that seriously, and entering into a volunteering type scenario is a great way to get into the Cancer energy. So for Leo, it's the sports activity with the teen boy, same phase, different energy. I think the implication is that it's sort of a team sports thing, potentially. I don't know if it's completely necessary. I had kind of a aversion to team sports and prefer to do things on my own. I think the implication that there is some sort of cooperative element necessary. Of course, if you're going into the energy with the person, there's going to be at least 2 of you, but I think, potentially all of these could include more people. So, for Virgo, this is one of my favorites, because I saw a meme in it. Maybe I'll put those up here. It went something like, some of you didn't spend enough time in your childhood making potions out of sticks and berries and shit, and it shows. That's the energy. This is making the potions. Oh, I used to do this for hours in my sandbox, and it would drive my mom crazy, because there were certain flowers. We had these, I think they were called like little grape hyacinth or something like that, and they had these petals that were like kind of little purple, very magical looking. And I would strip them and keep all the little, she hated it, she'd go out there and they'd all be stripped, and all the rose petals and stuff. Oh yeah, I was a menace in the garden. But yeah, with the little girl, same 7-ish, 8 bracket, girl child. Yeah, in that type of prop-driven imaginative play with floral elements seem to be a very archetypal, informative activity in the Virgo energy. And then for Libra, it's visiting the city center or museum with the mature female. So it's doing something in more of that built social environment, such as like a downtown or a city center, going and seeing performance or some art display or demonstration or touring a capital or something like that. Those are all activities that cultivate that Libra mode of thinking. For Scorpio, this is to the infant girl, the 0 to 4. This is coloring with the toddler girl. Just could be a coloring book, could be a blank paper, could be the wall, whatever's available, you know, just spending time sitting and just vibing and coloring. That's, I think right now, kind of one of the most archetypal flow activities that's touted, you know, in any type of self-help direction is they've got all those adult coloring books, all the mandala ones that are quite pretty, you know. So it's that vibe. It's that like pure flow, chill. But it's also a good way to bond with toddler girls, as it turns out. I remember very clearly anybody who took the time to, you know, to sit there in my process. And sometimes it was annoying if they asked questions, but, you know, I always had some zippy little response of like, oh, that's an interesting choice of color. Why did you feel the sky needed to be green today? Like, because I felt like it. Yeah. But, you know, I think secretly I was kind of like, they noticed, you know. It's turning your attention to and valuing that activity, no matter how infantile it may seem or how insignificant. For Sagittarius, this is another good one. Working on vehicles with Dad, out in the garage with Dad, being asked for various wrenches and tools, and yeah. Now it, of course, it doesn't have to be a garage. I found the vehicle archetype to be kind of interesting in association with the father archetype, right? Because the vehicle or the chariot, you know, is the conveyor of the family to the outside world, and you know there are a lot of fathers who take a great deal of pride in the safety and other things about, you know, the vehicle of choice. My dad's really into cars, so I kind of associate that with being the dad activity. For Capricorn, this is fishing or chess in the park with Grandpa. Yeah, pretty explanatory. This is if you want to bond with Grandpa and get on his level, you're going to be doing something kind of quiet and slow. So fishing is a great example. I put that under Grandpa, not Dad, although of course there could be some overlap, certainly. For Aquarius, which is the infant male, this is chasing clouds or daydreaming with the toddler boy. You know, kind of similar in severity to coloring, as far as productivity, you know, like the idea of just laying there and staring at clouds, I'm sure, is pretty abhorrent to a lot of adults who have very busy schedules and want to get on with the day and get things done, but taking the time to step back and do that, particularly if you're looking to bond with, you know, that, I think can be really helpful. This is probably the one I'm weakest at, if I'm honest, but very restorative and definitely worthwhile. And I think that's the big kicker for all of these. It's just like taking the time to do it, acknowledging it as worthwhile. The amount of time is probably not that much that's really necessary. I think these are all really great shortcuts, as I said, to get to a breakthrough. I think even just demonstrating your willingness to do it, especially if you have previously demonstrated resistance, I think kind of that act of, you know, goodwill itself and, you know, trust of the process is kind of all it takes to get that beneficial effect. But you do have to wholeheartedly be willing to be in it for as long as it takes and not just hope to skip on through. But that said, I don't think it actually ends up taking all that long. So finally, for Pisces, this is shelling peas on the porch with Grandma. It's another meme-worthy one. Nobody takes the time to do that these days. And yeah, as far as like storytelling, in particular, you know, a lot of that comes from being kind of immobile and stuck for a while doing some sort of raw food processing activity. And that's something that we've so largely mechanized and taken away from ourselves. And I think it's really a problem because it's not really about the thing. It's not really about the peas, right? It's about spending the time and being in that energy. And I've definitely noticed that when my grandmother was still with us as like a thing, you know, doing some type of, she did all kinds of, you know, canning and baking, so kind of similar to the mom energy, but I think there's kind of more of that like prep work element of like just processing, you know, shucking corn, or, you know, whatever your regional food kind of is. And I definitely noticed this a lot in group activities, anywhere there was some sort of holiday potluck going on, like the natural organization it kind of took, you know, when everybody got to their little cutting station, or, you know, the work was all doled out and everything. Once everybody kind of settled into that rhythm, there was something very liberating about it, where it was just so rhythmic and so old hat for the older members that they would kind of open up, and naturally this hierarchy formed, particularly in groups that were all female, although of course that's not necessary. But there was a very primal, automatic, okay, this is our story circle. And I think you can achieve the same with something like a campfire. You know, we have certain primordial situations that will naturally evoke the kind of pro-social bonding behavior. You know, sometimes they're team-building exercise. It's a very, you know, kind of derogatory or sarcastic thing. But I think it actually could be that simple, that putting the time in to do that and value that, you know, has good cooperation results. And, you know, I think we've been conditioned to be a little bit arrogant, or like, oh, I don't need to do that, or, you know, all these things should be mechanized, or I don't have time for that, you know. And I think it's important, if you're feeling those kind of stresses or pressures, to take a step back and be like, why don't you have time to do that? Who's taking that time away? Why do you feel like if you worked overtime or did this extra thing, like the results would be better? You know, what are you losing along the way? You know, I do totally understand and commiserate with the grind, and, you know, I get it. But at the same time, like, it's your life and you need to be the safeguard of it. It's not necessarily that someone else is going to come from the outside and make sure you are fulfilled and your needs are taken care of, right? You have to do that for yourself. You have to be a good parent to yourself. And, you know, sometimes that does mean setting more boundaries at work, or saying no to things and making sure that you're taking that time. And then, I'm not saying don't feel guilty about things that feel like time wasters. You're gonna probably feel bad about it. I feel bad about it all the time. I'm terrible at relaxing. Like, I can't just chill. I'm notoriously bad at it. But that's nobody's fault but my own. I'm learning to do better about it. The first step, the hardest step, is just giving yourself permission, and giving yourself permission to be kind of bad at it for a while and have it feel bad for a while, and, you know, understand and trust that that's going to be the first step to getting better at it. But that it's worth getting better at, that you are worth getting better at, if that makes sense. It's important and worthwhile, and you are worthy of getting better at being yourself and taking whatever time is required to do that. And so I hope that these suggestions of activities were helpful. If there's particular sides of yourself that you're noticing blockage or resentment and you want to try to free up that energy, there's some solid specific examples for you. And thank you so much for joining me today. I know this was a little disorganized and informal, but, you know, I will probably be producing more specific videos about these topics when I figure out the way that they're supposed to be in the world. So, thank you very much.